Hey folks, Happy New Year and welcome to the Roaring 20s. Today we're working on Tony Rice's break for Orphan Annie. Now, Orphan Annie is a Norman Blake tune that he put out on his debut album that's Home in Sulphur Springs, 1972. And later on, Rounder Records re-released that album and they called it Back Home in Sulphur Springs. I have no idea if they did that on purpose or not. Later on, Tony Rice released his version on the Church Street Blues album, and I believe that's 1983. Now, you may know that I try to stay away from breaks that people have already transcribed before. I don't want to step on any toes. Of course, I don't want people to think that I just looked at the other transcription. However, the Orphan Annie break is covered in this book, Tony's Choice. The break that's in this book varies pretty significantly from the album version, so I figured I'd just get the recorded version down on paper for you all today. So last night, I stayed up and I transcribed this break after all of my scheduled Skype lessons. Then this morning, I recorded that guitar demo that you saw at the beginning of the video. Now, I'm really excited to break this all down for you, but first, let's go over some things that you should probably have under your belt first. So most of this break is built with the C major pentatonic scale with the minor third included. And if you've been around this channel for a while, that probably sounds pretty familiar with you. That's something Tony Rice does a lot. So let's learn that scale real quick. The other little thing that I'd like to point out are these little pull-off ornaments that Tony Rice likes to include. We get two of them at the end of the break, and they're basically a downstroke pull-off followed by an upstroke on a lower string. So here's two moments isolated and then repeated. Awesome, that's all I wanted to talk about. Go ahead, listen to this break again, check out all of that C major pentatonic stuff, make sure that really stands out to you, and also watch for those pull-offs towards the end. They definitely stand out. So great, hopefully you saw the things that we were looking for. Now we can go into the play-by-play breakdown and we can discuss all the little intimate moments throughout the break. All right, cool, let's talk about this tune section by section. Probably wasn't a good idea to wear a green hat the first time I'm using the green screen. So if we look at this first line right here, we see this measure. Some of you may recognize what this is. That is a pickup measure that actually happens right before the form starts to get us into the break. Normally pickup measures have a rest on beat 1, and this break is no exception to the rule, right? The thing is that we do come in on the and of 1, which means we come in on an upstroke. It's still alternating picking pattern. Just because there's a rest here, we're coming in on up instead of down. So up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Hammer on into beat 1. That's our next interesting thing to talk about. Once again, we don't get a downstroke on beat 1 because we're actually playing a hammer on to get into that first note of the C. This should seem very, very similar to the C major pentatonic scale that we already covered. That's basically what this is. If we look over here, we get a similar thing, right? This is some similar language. We have this. There's two things we should talk about in this measure. Number one, we get two upstrokes in a row. You look at these pointy guys, those are upstrokes, right? So because we have a pull-off right here, we don't get the downstroke we were expecting right there. So up, up. And then these notes in parentheses, it's not that they're ghosted or they're not there or something like that. It's just that Tony lightly strums some of the chord. And a lot of times I like to write that in parentheses just to let people know, like, hey, loosen up, you're not flat picking, you're just strumming a chord real quick. Because that's what Tony's doing. If we look over here, we get some notes that are definitely not in the C major pentatonic. That guy and that guy. These are F notes because we're playing over the F chord. Makes a lot of sense when you think about it. It sounds like this. I would wager that 90% of you are going to struggle with these three notes. It's very tough to skip a string, especially when you speed things up. And this one will get collateral damage if trying to play this line. You'll end up playing that B string. So look at this section very carefully. This accuracy is tough to attain, but you can do it. Looking over here, this measure is very simple. Nothing too tough here. Right? The trouble comes with this measure. So we have a rest on beat 1. So 1 and beat 2 would be here. 2 and 3, 4 and. So 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and. So to play that, 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and. If I put it together with the measure before it, just like that, I have 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and. For those of you that would likely just do better hearing me play it at speed, it sounds like this. Once again, because these notes end up on ands, we have 2 ups in a row. Because these end up on downbeats, we have 2 downs in a row. This next measure is very C major pentatonic. The stuff we expect to see, no big surprises. If we look over here, this line right here, starting on the D chord, once again, we get some notes that aren't C major pentatonic. Specifically, this guy, this F sharp note over the D chord, which makes sense because the D chord has F sharp in it. This is what we would expect. This line is very, very fun right here. Love that. So 1 pick stroke, you get to move that note up and down. Right here, this is kind of a G major pentatonic line. We're playing over a G chord. Not too surprising, right? Looking over here, once again, we have some interesting counting. 1 and, beat 2 would be here, and 3, 4 and. So 1 and 3, 4 and. Looking over here, this measure shouldn't shock us too much. We have very C major pentatonic. Over here, we do have some interesting stuff. We got these 2 pull-offs in a row. And some of you, the keen-eyed among you, may be like, hey, Marcel, you got your pick strokes wrong. I did not actually get my pick strokes wrong. That is intentional. I'll show you what I mean if you didn't catch it. This is 1 and 2. You can see beat 1 is a downstroke. Beat 2 should also be a downstroke, but it's an upstroke. And it only gets worse. This is an and, that's 2 and that's a downstroke. It doesn't make any sense. This eventually is 3 and it makes sense for it to be an upstroke. The reason why I did this is because it's kind of a 3-note pattern. Down, up, up. They fit together in a nice way. And this is something that Tony was fond of. Tony would often alter his picking like this in these kind of situations. If we keep going, look at like this. These notes that we end up sliding into up here, even though they're not in the C major pentatonic shape that I showed you, they are indeed C major pentatonic, so no worries right there. That measure right there looks like this. That was actually continuing all the way up to here, all the way up until you can't see the music because I'm in the way. Here we go. Now, these are the 2 sections I was talking about. Right here and right here should look very familiar to you. We worked on those in the beginning. And I like to think about these almost as 2 eighth notes, like 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. Just down, up, down, up, down, up. And those 2 notes that pull off, I'm just playing it as fast as possible. That's normally how bluegrass musicians get that kind of sound out. Same thing, of course, happens right here. Everything else should be pretty much as expected throughout here. This ending line right here, let me get out of the way. This line right here. Open 2-3, open 2-3 on your E string and your A string. Very similar to the beginning, right? If we look at the beginning here, isn't that similar? Tony's just walking up into that C note. Nothing too surprising right there. But that is the whole break broken down, if you will. Now, one last time, let's listen to this break. So feel free to practice along to this performance. You can also use YouTube's playback settings in the settings wheel down below to slow down the performance to play along to it. You can also get the tab for free at my website, lessonswithmarcel.com. Now, if you like taking a lesson from the biggest, baddest Billy Goat in the barnyard, there's a couple things you can do, just like always. Please like, comment, subscribe, all the normal YouTube things. You know what you're doing. But you can also check out my website, lessonswithmarcel.com. That'll show you all the new things that I got going on. We got lots of merch. We got tabs. You can sign up for Skype lessons. Really check out the site. It's an awesome resource, and there's so much free stuff on there. Anyway, I will see you next week.